welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 2, Episode 35. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. An open and introductory apology to all my female listeners. This week, I preview the Major League Baseball playoffs with my friend and frequent special guest, Brian. And a quick note about the conclusion to the Robert Sarver Phoenix Suns saga. As always, thank you very much to all of my listeners. I do appreciate you actually taking the time to listen to me ramble on. Please give the podcast a like, thumbs up, review, heart emoji, eggplant emoji if it's appropriate. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. It's baseball time.
Act 1. Sorry, ladies, an entire podcast about the Major League Baseball playoffs with special guest Brian.
Back to take his triumphant victory lap, Brian, the Atlanta Braves aficionado. Go ahead and take it, Brian. Go ahead and take your lap.
Mr. Knackley, it is a pleasure, my friend, as always, to jump on the This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast with you, specifically after baseball season when the Braves yet again steal one away from the New York Metropolitans.
I have to say, go ahead, keep going.
All right. Well, so, here's the thing, and we've talked about this last year in the past. Prior to the podcast, everything. As I always said, the Mets will be the Mets until proven otherwise. Well, I think this year they proved otherwise. And this was not necessarily just a Mets collapse, more than it was the Braves were just better. And they were better from about June 1st on. There was I saw some numbers that when the Braves swept the Mets at the end of the season, Mets led the division for 170 days. Braves led it for 2. And this wasn't the classic Mets collapse. That they're a good team. The Braves were just absolutely 100% unrelenting through the entire thing and just got better. Best record in baseball from June 1st. 2 rookies that really shined this year. Michael Harris was called up May 28th. He had played so well by August 17th. The 21-year-old had earned himself a 7-year, $82 million contract. Won Rookie of the Month in his first month of June, his 3rd month of August, his 4th month of September. The only month he didn't win it was when Braves starting pitcher Spencer Strider won it in July. There were some key pickups at the trade deadline, not nearly what they were last year, but the bullpen that the Braves have right now is quite possibly the best in baseball, and they quite possibly have the most complete team in all of baseball. That said, the Mets didn't lose this, Braves won it. And they won it in very strong fashion with that final 3-game sweep of the Mets. Lost the next game after a long weekend, lost the next game at the Marlins. They landed in Miami at 3:30. They came out flat, and they wrapped it up the next night. And from that point, there really was nothing the Mets could do.
Well, here's what I want to say about the comeback, if you will, of the Braves. The Mets, looking at the records, I've gotten a lot of flack, lol Mets, blah, blah, blah. And you look at the record at the end of the season, the Mets won 101 games, the Braves won 101 games. That's a Mets team that was second to last in the division last year after leading, as you always rightly point out, leading the division for the first 5 or 6 months of the season. This was not a collapse. You did sum it up accurately. The Mets didn't lose this. The Braves certainly won it. One of the most frustrating things for me in watching those 3 games at the end of the season that decided the division where the Mets get swept, as I think, if my recollection serves, and I probably should have looked this up before we had this call, I think the Mets were 9 for 39 or 9 for 40 with runners in scoring position against the Braves in those 3 games. You can't beat the Braves, who hit a ton of home runs. You can't beat them without scoring a lot of runs. And if you don't hit home runs, you have to hit well with runners in scoring position and with 2 outs. And the Mets just didn't do it. You know, the first game, they had the bases loaded against Jansen, and I think it was only 1 out. They didn't score a run. They had numerous times in those 3 games to take at least 1 game, and frankly, that's all they would have needed, and they could have won the division. But like you said, the Braves were a steamroller at the end, and they won it. The Mets didn't necessarily lose it. Again, a team that won 101 games is not really a laugh-out-loud team.
No, I agree with you. And I've seen a lot of memes. I've shared some with you of people that were, showing different ways to illustrate the race. In Atlanta, one of the mid-inning extravaganzas is a sprinter called the Freeze, who takes on willing fans between, the 6th, 7th inning, something along those lines, where he gives these fans a 40, 50-yard head start, and then he catches up with them and just runs by them. And that's essentially what happened. The Braves started out bad, and they were in the midst of a losing streak at the end of May. I think they got swept in Arizona, or at least lost 2 out of 3 in Arizona. They were not playing well. After that game, Brian Stinker had a closed-door session with the team. And beginning June 1st, they rattled off 14 in a row, won 21 in the month. You're right. You've got to be able to take it in. And the Braves have been subject to that this year as well. I think over the last 2 days, they left 21 men on base in scoring position, or just 21 left on base. I don't know necessarily in scoring position, but you can't do that. I'll chalk that up to end of the season. But, the heart attacks and near heart attacks that we've had with Kenley Jansen leading up into that were tremendous. I saw some statistics. Towards the end of August, he was faltering. He was giving up saves. He had, through 7 games, he was 0-2, had 3 blown saves, 7 runs, 11.12 ERA. From that point forward, in 11 games, he gave up 5 hits, 3 walks, had a .82 ERA, and was 8 for 8 in saves, including the 4 of the most important of the season in just 5 days, right? 3 of those against the Mets.
Right.
And that's, those were our heart attacks to an extent. Going into September, you're wondering, is Kenley the guy? Because if he's not, we don't know where he's going to go or where you're going to put him. But if he's on, those last 3-4 innings, you got to score some runs against the Braves early on against starters. And that's getting more and more difficult. But once that bullpen comes in, there are so many weapons that they have. Weapons that can go 2 to 3 innings. 7, 8, and 9 are pretty much solidified right now. And they are just all shut down pitchers right now. And, going into the playoffs, that's what you need. But you hit it on the head. You can't leave. You can't be 9 for 40 with runners in scoring position and expect to beat the Braves. It's not going to happen. Agreed.
Well, congratulations to the extent I can say that without feeling like I've had someone shit in my mouth. Let's move on to the actual playoffs. And one of the consolations here, for me at least, is that, okay, the Mets didn't win the division. If this were 20 years ago, I truly would be upset. They do make the wild card. We'll start. The Mets take on the Padres. I'm interested to hear if you think the Padres can actually beat the Mets in that opening series.
It's interesting. This year with the expanded playoffs for the first time like this, it's going to be really interesting. The great news is that the 1-game wild card game, send it all out, is out the window. Braves were a huge victim of that years ago when the infamous infield fly rule was called. But right now you've got, as you're going into this, you got 3 games that start tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday, so that 3 games that start tomorrow in both leagues. They're all back-to-back. They're all in New York. The home team has all 3 of those games. And, coming out of that, I think there's another 1-day rest before you dive straight into the NLDS series. So it's going to be interesting. The home field advantage could really, really take hold in these playoffs this year when you're talking about a 3-game series. San Diego playing the Mets. San Diego's no slouch. They're a good team. They got significantly better at the trade deadline when they picked up Juan Soto. So they've got a solid team. They have solid frontline starters. Yu Darvish, Snell's up there. So there's a shot, but I'm probably going to lean more towards home field advantage than looking at, comparing team to team. I think they've got enough weapons to do it, but the question is, can they do it at Citi Field and take 2 out of 3?
I'm glad you brought that up. We were going to talk about every single one of the series. The change in the format, the fact that you've got this 1-game playoff, it's out. You get 3 games, but because it's 3 games and they're back-to-back, they're not allowing what we'll call the road team, the lower seed, to have one of those as a home game. And I think it puts each of those teams that is the lower seed, the road team, in an extreme disadvantage. No more so in any of the series than the San Diego Padres at the New York Mets, although you could make an argument that the Mariners at Toronto is equally as bad. But San Diego having to come all the way across the country, and they are another team like the Braves. They've got a lot of great hitters. They hit home runs. Citi Field is not the ideal place for a home run hitting team. I think it is the biggest ballpark in the league, if not the second biggest. So I'm going to give that one to the Mets, but I think this is going to be a consistent theme because I, too, believe that the home teams have an extreme advantage in this new playoff format. Let's go on to the St. Louis Cardinals against the Philadelphia Phillies. What do you think about this? I mean, the Phillies are an interesting team in that they made the playoffs in the first place because they were atrocious for at least the first 8 weeks of the season, if not the first 10 weeks. Their defense is still suspect, yet when you look up and down the lineup, that's an all-star team.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, they're back-to-back. And the roster they've got strong. I mean, if you're talking about Bryce Harper as a designated hitter and, the rest of that lineup, not to mention the fact you've got, again, let's go back to frontline starters. You get Aaron Nola in there, a few others, and they're going to be a tough team to beat. You look at their last 2 months of the season, I'm just pulling up some records. I mean, they were 11-14 in September, 3-3 in October, and still made the playoffs. That says something. You've got some losing records. Now, this, from an Atlanta Braves fan perspective, this is the matchup that scares me the most, without a question. Fortunately, the Braves made it through. They don't have to play the wild card, which is truly going to be a gauntlet getting all the way through. You look at the Mets, they pull that off. They got to fly to L.A. and take 4 out of 7 from a team that, 116 games this year?
Yeah.
It just absolutely absurd. So that's the gauntlet that they've got, and then getting through. But looking at it from a Braves perspective, this Philly-St. Louis series is scary. I would say my instinct is go Phillies. Because St. Louis is such a dangerous team historically. Not to mention the fact that you throw in the sentimentality of you got Yadi Molina, you got Albert Pujols, and you got Adam Wainwright in their swan song this year. They all walked off the field together their last game of the year. Their swan song, do they have that it factor? statistically, this is Albert's worst season as a Cardinal, but better than any season he had when he was with the Los Angeles Angels. He's got 20-some home runs. Good for him. He hit over 700. I really hope nothing ever comes out about steroids with him, because I truly want to believe he's just one of the greatest hitters of all time. But it scares me, and because of the black voodoo magic that the Cardinals have, and they've always had. They were the ones that beat the Braves in that, 2012 in the one game wild card game where some infield fly rule was called for for some unknown reason. But again, you gotta I gotta stay home field advantage. You gotta think St. Louis is going to pull that out. It's tough to go into St. Louis at Busch Stadium regardless, and win any series, let alone a 3-game wild card series, when you've got all the cards on the table. And that leads into one of the biggest challenges with this and this new wild card matchup is you got 3 games, and then you got a day off, and you got 3 more games. You immediately start the next round, not 3 games, but a 5-game series. And it's going to be tough to set up pitchers. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that every team in that position has is, how do we set up our rotation when you got to go all in? You got to go all in for that thing, because if you don't win, you're going home. But then you got to come right back with another series right after it. So I'm gonna go St. Louis again, home field advantage. I think the Phillies have a shot. I don't know that they're consistent enough. I think that's been their biggest challenge all year, is they've just not been consistent.
Yeah, their defense is routinely let them down, or has routinely let them down, particularly against one New York Metropolitans. And again, I didn't watch all of the games between the Phillies and the Braves, but that has haunted them. And when you're playing on the road against what we can call a team of destiny, insofar as they've got 3 guys who are all great, who are all playing their last playoff series, everybody on the team is going to be doing everything that they can to be as successful as possible. It's going to be interesting. And the other thing that you said that I was going to actually mention is one of my big points, and you kind of stole the thunder. You've got to be able to manage your bullpen. You've got to be able to manage your starting lineup. You have to be very strategic in the way, if you are a wild card team, in the way you manage all of your players, your position players, all of the guys that you have sitting on the bench. That, in my mind, favors one Buck Showalter, and that's why, as much as I know it's a daunting task, in the Dodgers versus Mets series, I'm picking the Mets. First of all, I have a ton of Dodgers hate stemming from the series that the Mets should have won in 1989. One Oral Hershiser pitching probably as great as any pitcher has pitched in the history of baseball to beat the Mets. I've got to pick the Mets in that series. What do you think?
I think you're crazy, and not crazy as a fox. I don't know. I don't see that happening. I don't see coming out of a series against the Padres. Let's say it goes 3 games, right? You got a day off and you're flying to LA. Who you starting in game 1?
I don't want to start anybody on 3 days rest. That's why I'm hoping it only goes 2 games.
but what if it does? Right? Where are you going to go? Do you have that 4th starter? And I think that's really what's going to be different in these playoffs this year is, traditionally thinking you could go through a lot of series with 2 frontline starters and somebody behind it that's adequate, right? See, what was it, early 2000s Arizona Diamondbacks with Curt Schilling and the big unit, where they each pitched, 2 games in almost every series. You could do that then. I don't know that you can do that now, specifically with how pitching staffs are constructed now. With these playoffs, you really have to have 4 solid, incredibly solid starting pitchers Because, let's just say the Braves went through. The Braves went to the wild card game, right? You got Max Fried, Charlie Morton, and 21 game winner Kyle Wright that can pitch 3 games. And then coming off of rest of his oblique heels, you got Spencer Strider throwing 99 to 101 miles an hour for 6 innings. Right? You can do that. And then come back with Fried. Hopefully you won't have to throw a bullpen game. I mean, do the Mets have those 4 starters that they can put out there? Is there a 4th starter? Should it go 3 games? Is there a 4th starter that you'd feel confident with in game 1 against the Dodgers?
No, and that's an unfortunate reality. I don't feel, look, after what happened with DeGrom, starting with the A's and then with the Braves, and the fact that Scherzer, who I still trust, I trust them both, but he's coming off an injury. Against the Dodgers, I'm not confident at all in pitching. I'm confident in hitting. I want to see a lot of runs. I want to see a lot of hits. I don't think you beat the Dodgers in many 3-1 games, although who knows about the playoffs. The Dodgers do, at least over the course of the last 3 or 4 seasons, appear to get tight asshole in the playoffs, and they don't score nearly as many runs in every game as they appear to do in the regular season. But I agree with you, and it may be, I trust in Buck. I don't need to know. I trust that Buck will have it figured out, and if he goes platoon in game 1, it wouldn't disappoint me at all. If he said, look, I'm not going to put somebody out there to get shelled. I'll put someone out there to pitch 3 innings, and then I'll put someone else out for an inning, and then another for 3 innings. I'd be fine with that. I agree with you that I don't want to pitch DeGrom, who's coming off of practically a season-long injury, or Scherzer, who just came back on short notice, right, on 3 days rest. But having said all that, I'm going to place the New York Metropolitans in that space. You can place the LA Dodgers. You've got Atlanta versus, I'm going to pick St. Louis. I'm not even going to go into depth. I think you're going to pick Atlanta no matter what. I am too. So it's Atlanta versus LA in your mind. It's Atlanta versus the New York Mets in my mind. Can you beat the Dodgers this year? Can you beat them again, having to play potentially 4 games in LA?
Yes, and here's why. Braves had the best record in baseball from June 1 on. From about that point, they were running at about 118. They were on track in a 162-game season, a full season, of winning 118 games, which is just, it's an absurd number. We talked about the Dodgers winning 115, 116. I think it goes 6, probably 7. And I think what's going to benefit both the Mets and the Braves in series against the against the Dodgers, is the fact that Walker Buehler's not going to be pitching.
Right.
With Buehler out for the year, that kind of slims that staff down a little bit, but they're still hitting the hell out of the ball. They had, a 300 run differential between opponents this year?
Disgusting.
Against opponents? Yeah, absolutely disgusting. But I think it's possible. I think, and I'll just go based off of experience. And that's what the Braves have this year. They have the experience, top to bottom, of being in these big games, being in the World Series. Ronald Acuna's back. Ozzie Albies probably not. Ronald was out all season last year. He's beyond excited and thrilled to be in the postseason this year. If he can get right, and there were times this season coming off of his ACL, he just wasn't right. He didn't feel confident with his knee. But if he can get right and he can get on track, Matt Olson's back on, and then you got the gamer Dansby Swanson, not to mention Austin Riley, Michael Harris. You've just got, there's not a break in that Braves lineup. There's not a break for a pitcher to say, okay, now I got 7, 8, 9. I'm good to go. I can get some rest in here. In a lot of cases this year, 7, 8, 9 slots were the most were the best on the team. 7, 8, 9 hitters carried the teams through some downward times. You got Austin Riley just signed a 10-year, $212 million contract. You've got power top to bottom in that lineup, and the Dodgers can come close to it, but I don't know that they're going to have the pitching or the bullpen to do it. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Is it is an extremely tough starting lineup, but frontline starters and a bullpen that is absolutely lights out, one of the best in baseball this year.
Well, I'm going to agree with you to the extent that it is the Atlanta Braves versus the LA Dodgers. The Dodgers won a World Series. I'm not going to take anything away from that. But it has an asterisk in my mind. It was a COVID year. And when you don't have a lot of the things associated with a normal World Series, namely the travel, that is a significant factor in whether or not you're going to be able to win over, an October-November series. And the Dodgers have not proven that they are able to win in what I'll call a normal or a more typical baseball playoff setting. I feel like in many ways, both LA championships, the LA Lakers and the Los Angeles Dodgers, have asterisks next to those championships because they were COVID years. So I too agree. I think that the Braves in a series against the Dodgers are going to win again. Let's talk about the American League, and we can do it quickly because you and I offline both talked about this. I'd like to sit here and do an in-depth take on Tampa Bay versus Cleveland and Seattle versus Toronto. I do think Toronto is the dark horse in those 4 teams, one that can actually go far. The fact of the matter is, though, who's going to beat Houston? Who's going to beat New York? Do you think either one of those teams is going to be able to pull that off? Tampa Bay or Cleveland versus New York, Seattle, or Toronto versus Houston?
Let's go back. Let's go back to the home field advantage. So you got Tampa Bay, Cleveland, Cleveland at home. I'm going to take Cleveland and Tito in that series. You've got Toronto and Seattle. I don't know that Toronto has the pitching, and I think Seattle has the bats. Toronto's got the bats too, but I think Seattle's may have I think if there's going to be a home field upset in that first round, it will be Seattle. From that point, you got Seattle versus Houston. I don't see them beating them. I think Houston carries on. I think the one variable that could come into play is Cleveland, New York, and Cleveland possibly being able to steal 1 or 2 in New York and taking that series. From that point, I think it's Houston in the World Series again. And I think if Cleveland can't beat New York, and if New York gets through that, and we got a Yankees Astros ALCS, I think that's going to get extremely interesting, and I think it's a chance that the Yankees can take it over.
I'd like to agree with you just to see the spectacle that is the Yankees in the World Series, although I'm no Yankees fan, being a Mets fan. I watched, though, numerous games between the Yankees and Astros, that being the 3 that they had in New York, and then the 3 that they had, or I think it was 3 in Houston.
It might have been 4-4.
And what is so surprising is how well Houston plays in New York. Yes, Houston plays well at home. Everybody plays well at home. That's a good team. But Houston plays very confidently in New York. And I believe, if recollection serves, and I didn't look this up, but I'm pretty sure it's the case, that Houston would have swept New York in New York, but for the fact that New York came back in the 9th inning in one of the games and stole it. So Houston led in every one of the games up until the 9th inning of one of them, and Yankees came back and beat them. So Houston has a ton of confidence against New York, regardless of how New York, plays on offense, on defense. They just believe that they can beat them, and history has shown that they can. So you not only have the numbers, you have history, and you've got a team that's extremely confident. Houston, Atlanta, World Series. Can you beat Houston again?
I'm going to say yes. And I know it's definitely that homer confidence, but again, just going back to the lineup, there's not a break in there. You've got 4 solid frontline starters. If everybody can stay healthy, you got 4 solid starters. You've got the best bullpen in the majors, and you have 1 through 9 that can all take you deep. Now, the Astros have that to an extent, but they don't have 1 through 9. And I think the Braves have a legitimate chance of repeating this year. And I'm not the only one that thinks it. Just looking at the lineup. And let's go back for a second as we look going back to the National League. Let's talk Braves Mets NLCS. Series is going to be in Atlanta, right? Well, not fully in Atlanta, but Braves have home field advantage. Do you think the Mets can pull it off?
Yes, I do. And here's the reason why. The Mets play very well at home. Atlanta, as great a hitting team as they are, they rely on the home run. I know Buck told the team over and over again, look, you've got to be able to put runs up in Atlanta. You've got to be able to manufacture runs because they're going to crank home runs here. It's not as big a park. This is a home run hitting team. When we get back to Citi Field, when we play the games there, we can pitch them completely differently because those balls that go out in Atlanta, they're not going to go out in New York. So my hope against hopes, all the numbers, all of the players, you've got Buck Showalter saying, if we can get 1 in Atlanta, we can win every one of them at home because this is a home run hitting team and we're going to be able to keep them from hitting so many home runs, not by virtue of how great our pitchers are, but we're going to go in there and we're going to ingrain in their heads, you got a big ballpark, use it, and you'll take away the greatest weapon that this team has.
I think there's a shot. The question is, can DeGrom and Scherzer come back? They both got waxed in the Atlanta series, and both of them have not been pitching great. And if you're going to demand that kind of money, what are they getting paid? 70, 80 million combined this year?
Yes, 80.
Right. You can't go into the last important series of the season and get beat like that. I mean, you and I talked, offline on this. I thought the Braves would win it. I didn't think they'd win all 3. I thought they may pull off 2 out of 3, and then, the Mets have the tiebreaker. But you can't get paid that kind of money and lay an egg like that. You're expected to be that. The question is, can they do it? Now, I know the competitor that Scherzer is. He's not called Mad Max for no reason. And I think they can do it, but are they both going to be able to pitch 4 games in that series? So and it's 5-game series in the NLDS, correct? Is it still 5?
No, I think it's 7 now, but I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong about that. I think it's 7.
Right. So if it is 7, are they going to be able to pitch 4 games? Right. You got Cookie Carrasco that can come in and do it, but that gives you 3 starters. I think it's just top to bottom. I think the Braves are a better one. But all right, so let's go. We talked Braves Houston, and confidence that I think the Braves can still pull that off. What about Mets Houston?
I think the Mets can beat Houston. And it's the same logic. I haven't mentioned this, and I'm going to throw it out, because I too believe that if Houston plays Atlanta, Atlanta's going to win. Dusty Baker is an X factor here. Dusty Baker is an excellent manager. He has taken so many teams to the playoffs, to the World Series. He's never been able to win it. He's got a little Ron Washington in him. We can go into other sports, Marv Levy. He can get the most out of the players that he has on a team, and he's proven it over and over again. He has not proven that he can win a World Series. What would be interesting, and the reason why I offer this, they play the Braves. I've got to think that the Braves have the advantage. They play the Mets, though, Brian, and here you have another manager on the other side, one Buck Showalter. You can make the same exact argument. He's gotten the most out of the talent that he's ever had in any of the jobs that he's ever had. He could never win the World Series. He never won the big one. So to me, the more compelling matchup would be Dusty Baker's Houston Astros versus Buck Showalter's New York Metropolitans. Out of the two of those, I'm giving it to Buck. And I'm also using the same logic that I used against the Braves. Big ballpark. Again, Houston, Minute Maid. It's a home run hitter's park. They're not going to like the bigger ballpark. You've got to preach to the pitchers. You've got to use the entire field. Don't let these guys beat you with the long ball, and we're going to win this game. So I do believe the Mets can win it. It's just a matter of, can they get by? Because I do believe they're going to beat the Padres. Can they get by the Dodgers? Can anybody get by the Dodgers? I'm hoping that we get the Dodgers from a couple of years ago. Actually, I take that back. That was the World Series winning team. I hope we get the Dodgers from last year or 3 years ago, the team that would score 8 runs in one game and 1 run in the next game, and that's a beatable Dodgers team. Otherwise, I think the Dodgers may be playing the Astros, and if that's the case, I'm putting all my money on the Astros. Not because of any kind of stat. I want to see Dusty Baker win one, and I do not want to see the Dodgers win another one.
I'll agree. I think, as you know, just going back to that NLCS, the other compelling story is Braves Dodgers. Freddie Freeman against former team trying to get to the World Series he won it with last year.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And
you want to talk about emotional series. I mean, the man was crying when he came back to Atlanta for the first time in April. That's going to put some pressure on everybody.
Give me your final thoughts on the season, the playoffs, and in true victory lap fashion, since we're going to wrap it up, take your final victory lap.
It was a good run. It was stressful the entire season. I thought it was a great baseball season. It always ends too soon for me. Again, much to my wife's chagrin, I'm in front of the television almost every night watching games. But it was awesome. I mean, it was another great season. There were so many great storylines. I think the Buck Showalter storyline for the Mets was huge. You know, you want to talk about a turnaround. That's a Buck Showalter factor, 100%. I thought it was a great series. I thought it was a great season. I'm interested to see how this postseason format's going to work, and you know what's going to happen with those 3 games in those home cities. I'm excited. I'm just super excited about it. I mean, from my standpoint as a Braves fan, it was, you know, you're swimming uphill all season, and so many different factors come in. So many things get lost. Charlie Morton's not pitching like he should. We lose Ozzie Albies again. He comes back just in time for him to break a finger again. We've got the emergence of not 2, but really 3 rookies this year that have carried it through. So it's, from my standpoint, it's been an extremely exciting season. I know the same for you watching the Mets. The Mets were, as much as my dislike for them, they were a good baseball team this year. Showalter came in, turned everything around. And I think it's going to be a phenomenal postseason yet again. I think there's the stories that you're going to have. The Baker Showalter showdown in the World Series could be epic, just from that perspective. I hope it doesn't get there, but it could be epic. Dusty is one of those managers. They both have gotten the most out of their teams, and yet both of them have been outmanaged by one Brian Snitker at one point in time over the past 12, 13 months. So that's what's going to get interesting. That's what's going to get interesting. But you know what? It's postseason baseball, baby. Anything can happen.
That's the God's honest truth.
And I appreciate you coming on the podcast again. I wish you the worst of luck in the playoffs, and God bless.
Same to you, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Act 2, Ding Dong. Another Wicked Witch is dead.
Robert Sarver was suspended for 1 year and fined $10 million after an independent law firm found that pretty much most of the allegations made against the man were true. I'm not here to comment on whether or not that is an appropriate suspension or an appropriate fine, given what Sarver had done over the course of, it appears, a decade to numerous staff members of the Phoenix Suns. Because of the fine, because of the suspension, Sarver has decided to sell the team. I did an entire segment on not just Sarver's conduct, but Sarver's tenure as owner of the Suns. Mark my words, Sarver sells the Phoenix Suns. Within 3 years, they win the NBA championship. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.